When you retire, the world hands you a standard script. Go volunteer, it'll keep you busy. And you know what? That is terrible advice. Because something to do is exactly what we don't need. We spent 40 years doing. We spent decades chasing deadlines and filling quotas. The last thing you need in your second act is another place to clock in.
Most people treat volunteering like a low-stakes job. You show up, perform a task, check the clock, and go home. It fills the hours, but it rarely fills the void. That's because it's still rooted in doing. The shift we need to make is deeper. It's about moving from being a passive volunteer to becoming an active community builder. It's the difference between filling a shift and creating a connection. Let's talk about the trap of transactional service. This is where most of us land when we first try to give back. You walk into an organization full of energy and experience, and they hand you a vest and a schedule. They tell you to stand here, sort this, or drive there, and suddenly you realize you haven't retired at all. You've just taken a demotion. This is the volunteer trap. It treats service like a diluted version of the corporate grind, relying on the same clock in, clock out mentality. You trade your time for a sense of moral obligation. But here is the truth. Obligation is a terrible fuel for the second half of life. It burns dirty and it runs out fast. The problem with this model is that it ignores your agency. In our careers, many of us were architects of our own days. We solved problems, built teams, and owned outcomes. When you trade that identity for the role of a generic helper, it feels hollow. I remember the first time I volunteered at a local food bank. I was tasked with breaking down cardboard boxes. Now there is dignity in all labor, and the work needed to be done. But as I stood there flattening box after box for 3 hours, I felt my energy draining away. It wasn't because the work was hard. It was because it was purely transactional. I was a cog in a machine that someone else had built. I wasn't connecting with the people we were serving. I wasn't using my brain to solve the logistics issues I could see happening right in front of me. I was just doing. But keeping busy is a poor substitute for living with intention. We often confuse movement with progress. We think if our calendar is full, our life must be meaningful. But if those calendar blocks are filled with activities where you are mentally checking out, you aren't living intentionally. You are just waiting for time to pass. The danger here is burnout. You see it all the time in retirees. They join 3 committees and a board, only to become exhausted and cynical within months. They aren't tired from the work. They are tired from the lack of meaning. They are tired of the transaction. This clicked for me one afternoon when I realized I was dreading my shift. I didn't want a shift. I didn't want a manager telling me when to take a break. I realized I didn't want a job description. I wanted a project. I wanted something I could build, nurture, and grow. I wanted to stop serving a system and start building a community. To understand the difference between a volunteer and a builder, think about the difference between mowing a lawn and cultivating a garden. Mowing is a chore. It is maintenance. You do it because the grass is too long, or the neighbors might complain. You push the machine back and forth. You walk the lines, and when you are finished, the result looks exactly the same as it did 2 weeks ago. That is the trap of traditional volunteering. It is necessary work, but it is repetitive, and its goal is simply to maintain the status quo. Cultivating a garden is entirely different. When you garden, you are looking at the soil composition. You are planning what blooms in May versus what blooms in September. You worry when it doesn't rain enough. You are delighted when a new shoot appears where you didn't expect it. That is building. You are emotionally invested in the health of the ecosystem. You aren't just maintaining a patch of grass. You are creating something that wasn't there before. When you adopt this builder mindset, the work stops feeling like an obligation and starts feeling like a passion. It becomes similar to a serious hobby. Think about the energy you bring to your hobbies, whether it's woodworking, painting, or researching genealogy. You don't clock in for your hobby. You don't look for the minimum viable effort. You dive in because the process itself is rewarding. You lose track of time because you have agency. You are the one making the decisions. This is where the freedom of the second act truly shines. For 40 years, your professional identity was likely built on competence. You had to be the expert. You had to demonstrate value to justify your paycheck or your promotion. That is a hard habit to break. We often carry that need to prove into retirement. But the beauty of this phase of life is that you no longer need to prove you are smart or capable. Your resume is finished. You don't need to impress a boss. This allows you to focus on connection rather than competence. You can focus on what actually helps rather than what makes you look good. This is why building allows for legacy, while volunteering often just treads water. When you volunteer to hand out flyers, you are helping the event happen today. When you build a system that helps new neighbors meet each other, you are creating a social fabric that lasts long after you step away. And you know what? This shift changes your energy levels. There's a concept called internal alignment. When your external actions match your internal values, you gain energy rather than losing it. If you leave a volunteer shift feeling drained and cynical, it's usually because you were just doing. You were acting out of duty. But when you are building, when you are solving a problem you care about in a way that uses your unique strengths, you leave feeling buzzed. You might be physically tired, sure, but your spirit feels lighter. You feel useful, not used. So, how do we actually do this? How do we stop waiting for instructions and start acting like architects in our own neighborhoods? It requires a change in strategy. So how do we practicalize this? How do we stop just showing up and start actually building? It requires a change in how you approach the work. You don't need permission to do this. You just need a new strategy. Here are 3 ways to make that shift. The first strategy is to look for gaps, not just slots. When most people approach an organization or a cause, they ask the same passive question. What do you need done? It seems polite, but it puts the burden on the organizer to find a place for you. And usually, they will fit you into a pre-existing slot. You become the Tuesday afternoon greeter or the Thursday morning driver. You fit into their machine. The builder asks a different question. What is missing here? Instead of looking for a role to fill, you look for a problem to solve. You look for the white space. Maybe you volunteer at the local library. The slot is shelving books, but while you are shelving, you notice that the teenagers who come in after school have nowhere to sit and talk, so they end up loitering in the parking lot. That is a gap. A volunteer just keeps shelving books because that is the job description. A community builder sees the gap and suggests a solution. Maybe you organize a simple chess club or just rearrange the furniture to create a welcoming corner. You aren't just maintaining the library anymore. You are improving how the community interacts with it. You aren't filling a slot, you are filling a need. The second strategy is to connect people, not just resources. Traditional volunteering is often about logistics. It is about moving goods from point A to point B. We deliver meals, we hand out coats, we distribute flyers. These are transactional interactions. The goal is the transfer of the resource. But a builder understands that the real resource, per postum, is the relationship. Your role isn't just to deliver the goods, it is to weave the social fabric. Or, if you deliver meals to shut-ins, the volunteer mindset is to get the food to the door while it is still hot. That is efficiency. But the builder mindset is to realize that Mrs. Higgins in apartment 4B and Mr. Smith in apartment 6B both love historical biographies, and they have never met. The builder takes the extra step to make that introduction. You move from being a courier to being a connector. You are weaving these people into a community rather than just servicing them as clients. That shift from transactional to relational is where the deep satisfaction lives. It transforms a lonely route into a neighborhood network. The third strategy is to treat it like a hobby, not a job. This is a mental switch. Think about how you treat your favorite hobbies, whether it's golf, gardening, or restoring old cars. You don't clock in for your hobby. You don't do the bare minimum. You bring curiosity, creativity, and enthusiasm to it. You are willing to experiment and fail because you care about the craft. Bring that same energy to your community work. If you treat it like a job, you will resent the hours. If you treat it like a hobby, you will get lost in the process. Allow yourself to be creative. If you are organizing a neighborhood cleanup, don't just follow the standard checklist. Ask yourself, how can we make this fun? How can we make this memorable? When you bring the spirit of a hobbyist, you bring joy, and joy is magnetic. People want to be around builders who are enjoying themselves. They repel from volunteers who look like they are serving a sentence. Now I can hear the hesitation. You might be thinking, this sounds like a lot of energy. I'm 65, I'm 70. Isn't building a young person's game? Bull. Here's the irony. Your age is actually your greatest asset as a builder. Younger people are often terrible community builders because they are in a rush. They are trying to build their careers, raise their families, and maximize their efficiency. They want to change the world by next Tuesday. They look for scale, speed, and credit. But real community building is slow work. It is gardening, not manufacturing. It requires patience, which is something you have engaged with for decades. You know that relationships take time to deepen. You know that trust isn't built in a day. You have the long view that younger builders lack. You also have a network, decades of meeting people, learning how systems work, and understanding human nature means you know who to call to get things done. Most importantly, you have lost the ego that demands credit. You don't need your name on the building or the applause. You just want the result. That lack of ego makes you incredibly effective because people trust you are in it for the right reasons. You don't need to build a massive nonprofit to be a builder. You just need to focus on the ripple effect within your own micro-community. Small, intentional actions create waves you don't need to force. Organizing a single potluck for your street, starting a walking group, or mentoring one young professional, that is building. It is enough, so that is the shift. It is the move from the volunteer label to the builder identity. It is the realization that you aren't finished contributing. You are just changing how you contribute. You are moving from doing tasks to creating connection. Here is my challenge to you. Meaningful work is waiting for you, but you have to claim it. Identify one area in your life this week where you can stop serving a system and start building a community. The world has enough volunteers. We need you to build.